on the board. We studied Revelation 13 last time, and remember the two beasts in Revelation. You know, there's been a lot of talk about the beast of Revelation and what he signifies, and I think a lot of people certainly missed the point. But there were two beasts: the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. And we talked about that first beast, Revelation 13, 1 through 10. Being a symbol of anti-Christian government. You remember in put that up there, but anti-Christian government being the first beast, and in John's day, Christians obviously would have been thinking about who? About when they read about this beast that had authority and was demanding honor and had this power over them. They would have been thinking about who? The Roman Empire, right? That was the persecuting power of their day. And then this second beast, verse 11 and following, to the end of chapter 13, this beast from the earth, anti-Christian religion. We talked about how in the Roman Empire you had the religion, the idol worshiping cults, the priests, those local officials who would have been, conducting the worship and that sort of thing, working together with Rome, working together with the empire, enforcing the laws of the emperor. So you had these two beasts working together, and they were all anti-Christian. They were all against the religion of the Christians. They were these polytheistic, idol-worshiping people. And of course, when you take people like that and you take Christians and you put them together in the same room or in the same location, there's going to be conflict, right? And that's really what we see in chapter number 13. There are two things that I wanted to touch on before we left chapter 13. This mark of the beast and then this number 666. Look at verse number 16 in chapter 13. It's talking about this beast from the earth, and we said earlier that this beast from the earth likely represents the anti-Christian religion, the local officials, something of that nature. And then in verse 16 it says, he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. Okay, then verse 17, and that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So this mark of the beast, what is going on here? I want you to leave your marker here and flip a few pages back to chapter number 7. And I want to remind us of something else here that I think will help us interpret this mark of the beast. Now, turn back to chapter number 7. And do you remember when we talked about this seal of God, that God sealed his servants on the forehead with their seal? Do you remember when we talked about that? What did the seal represent? What was the use of seals back in that day? Do we remember? What is a seal for? What do you use a seal for? Identification, okay. What about like authorization? That sort of thing. It's kind of like their signature, right? I guess back in those days, that they had to have their form of authorizing something, and so they had their seal. Well, look at chapter 7, beginning of verse 1, just to bring this to our remembrance. After these things I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. Okay? Keep reading in verse 2. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have what? Sealed the servants of God on their foreheads. Now, do we remember what the point there is with the seals in chapter 7? Anybody remember that? First of all, who's under discussion here? Who are the servants of God?
Christians.
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. Keep reading verse number 4. I heard the number of those who were sealed, and this is another important thing to remember when we go into chapter 14. 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. So we said here that this 144,000 who received this seal represents the church, and that this seal of God identified them as children of God, as servants of God, and sealed them for protection. It was a mark of, let's do this. Can y'all read that? Is that okay? A mark of ownership, okay? Showing that they belong to God, and thus belonging to God, they are in good shape. You know, God's going to protect them. God is going to take care of them, okay? So if you have the seal of God, that's a good thing. All right, now turn back to chapter 13. Talking about this seal. Looking again back there at verse number 16. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, talking about this beast, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand and on their forehead. So this is kind of the same idea, okay? But this is a different kind of mark. This is the mark of the what? Okay. So in chapter 7, the Christians had the mark of God. Okay, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I need to emphasize that beast was the Roman emperor.
Yes, yeah, we established that. You know, in the previous discussion there. So, the mark of God in the earlier chapters, but now you have this mark of the beast, and as Jim said, we talk about the Roman Empire, anti-Christian government, that sort of thing. So, you got something that's totally different here. If you have the mark of God, you're a Christian, you're owned by God, but this mark of the beast, that means you belong to who? Someone else, okay? Now, who owns you, or who's controlling you? The Roman Empire. And let's do something else here. Not only do I think this sign here, the beast, this mark on their foreheads represent ownership, but I think something else here that's important to keep in mind is that this is a mark of commitment. Now, it's hard to nail down, okay, well, what this mark of the beast, I understand the picture here, but what does it represent? Was there actually a literal mark that the Roman Empire, West in the book talks about this ID card that they would, some might have had back in those days that testified that they have devotion to the emperor, they worship the emperor, they've taken part in that idol worship and that sort of thing. Was it a literal mark, or showing that their identity with, or their identification with the Roman Empire, or is this mark of the beast just simply figurative in nature? Okay? And I kind of lean toward the latter. I really think that this mark of the beast is just kind of what we might call, inner commitment, or just a figurative kind of way to show that these folks, hey, you're an idol worshiper, you worship, and you take part in this emperor worship. Well, there's your mark right there. There's your picture. There's your sign that they're involved with this emperor worship, and they're involved in this commitment to the beast. But it's kind of hard to nail down. But I think these two words here, ownership and commitment, help us understand the mark of the beast. Okay.
They couldn't sell their produce, could they, unless they had that mark on them?
Well, as it says in verse 17, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or name of the beast. Now, Linda, like you said, turn back to chapter number 2, that there is indication that Christians, were persecuted on an economic level because of, hey, they're not paying allegiance to the empire. They are Christians. What is it? It's Revelation 2. I had it in my notes here. On that, let me find it here. Talking about economic hardship.
Yeah, they could.
Yeah, 2 in verse 9. Writing to the church in Smyrna, the Lord said, I know your works, tribulation, and poverty, but you are rich. So, an indication there that Christians were persecuted on an level because, they didn't take part in this emperor worship, and we talked about that. And that's the same thing that's being said there in verse number 13, because these Christians did not take part in that, they suffered in that way. But again, I guess the question is it because they didn't really literally have this mark, or is it just simply because people know that they were Christians and they didn't take part? Thinking about the figurative element of Revelation, it makes me think that this was not something literal in nature. It was just the idea that, hey, the mark is really inner in nature, it's spiritual in nature. I think that's my thought there. But it really is hard to nail down. But I don't think this mark of the beast that some people think is just mystical in nature, or something that, you're going to see this one man come into the picture one day and have this mysterious look about him. I definitely don't think that's the case.
It seems to me like that mark had to be something visible, because they couldn't, if you didn't have that mark, you couldn't do anything.
Yeah, it very well may be. Like, West in the book talks about this ID card, this certificate, and there's evidence, that he quotes there, that they had to carry around that showed that, hey, I paid allegiance to the emperor, I've taken part in this idol worship. And that may be what's being under consideration.
And the Christians didn't have that.
Yeah, and they certainly didn't have that in their heart either.
No.
So.
That's why Christians got burned at the stake like they did, because they didn't have that mark.
Well, they didn't take part in the idol worship. They were faithful to God. So I think maybe that helps us there. Whatever, however you take that mark, whether it be literal or figurative, I think that it's a symbol of ownership or commitment to the Roman Empire, ownership, that sort of thing. But let's move on to the last part here, the 666.
The bottom line of all this is, though, if you didn't participate in that evil that the Roman Empire wanted them to do, you did win. They didn't, but you did.
Yeah, and that's what when you get in chapter 14, well, all throughout the book of Revelation. But the point is victory. You may be persecuted here today, and they were, but ultimately God wins and you win if you stay faithful.
And that same thing applies to today.
Yeah. You
don't have to have a mark, but you don't participate.
Yeah, and so that again makes me think about, the integrity in nature. But anyway, we can talk about that for a long time, but I think you get the point. Look at verse number 18. This is another pretty difficult passage here. Talking about this mark of the beast, this verse 17, the name of the beast, with the number, having the number of his name. Verse 18, here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, I've always heard people talk about this 666 as some kind of you see it in horror movies, the 666, which means something devilish. You think about people being demon possessed and that sort of thing, being this, demon associated number sort of thing here. But I don't think we should move in that direction. There are really two interpretations here. Let me mention the first one. Some believe that this 666 is actually the total of the. Let me go back. The Hebrew alphabet, they assigned numerical values to each letter in the Hebrew alphabet. Now, I don't know exactly how that worked. Like the first letter in the alphabet, that actually had a numerical value. For instance, if we had the letter A, we said, well, the letter A means 5, and the letter B means 6, and the letter C stands for 7. From my understanding, that's the idea. And what some say is that if you take the numerical values of all the letters in Nero's name, you come to the equivalent of 666. So, 666, does it stand for Nero? The Emperor Nero? That's what some believe. That And it's kind of difficult to explain. From my understanding, the problem with that is you kind of have to take Nero's name and maybe add a title, or you have to have it a certain way for it to, you got to tweak it a little bit for it to get the 666. Well, there it is.
Caesar, this stuff.
Yeah, Caesar Nero. Well, what if you take out the Caesar, then it doesn't come to 666, So, from my understanding, you have to work real hard to get 666. I mean, you can get it out of Nero's name, but it's kind of difficult. So that's kind of the downfall, or an argument against this particular interpretation. But there's another idea here that I think maybe more likely to be the answer to this question. And that has to do with the number 6 and the number 7. Okay. Now you have 666, but what is this number 7 in the Bible? And it's been used in this way in the book of Revelation already. Number 7 is a symbol of what? Perfection. Okay. I think that goes back to creation. God created the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th. So, but you have the number 6 here. 6 is one less than 7. I can do that in my head, right? I can do that. So 6 is one less than 7. Thus, you get the idea of imperfection. He's come up short. Right? And what some will say is, well, you got that number 6 not only one time, but you got it repeated how many times? 6 and 6, that's 3 times. So the number 3 may be indicating this idea of emphasis or completeness. Okay, so completely imperfect. So imperfection, maybe this number 6 is a symbol of imperfection or failure. And when it's repeated 3 times like that, it's just for emphasis. So maybe John, through inspiration here, is trying to emphasize the imperfect nature of who? The beast that he's been talking about in verse number 16, or in chapter number 13. I tend to fall in that camp, trying to figure out what 666 is. 666 means, I think it's the idea is trying to help people put in perspective that this beast may think he is divine, but he's not. And ultimately he will fail. Whereas God will win. Right? And he is the symbol of perfection. That's my thinking there.
The final analysis is that the people of God are going to come out on top.
That's exactly right. And I think, again, the imperfection of the beast versus, the perfection of God and the victory that he will certainly attain. Let me read you a quote here. Something else about taking that 666, and if you say, well, it means it has to do with Nero. Again, there's a lot of arguments that challenge that. Again, I think the book was written in the 90s under the Emperor Domitian. I think there's proof of that. But just trying to convince me that is the way 666 is being interpreted, that the readers were to take Nero's name and add up the numerical value of each letter and come to 666. Is that really what John expected his readers to do when he saw that? Should that number be interpreted that way? And I like what one of the commentators that I follow wrote. He says, if the number were intended to be identified as some ruler by means of such literal calculation, it would be a rare exception from the way numbers are employed elsewhere in the book of Revelation. So the idea is that nowhere else in the book of Revelation are we supposed to do that with a number. Or are we supposed to look at a number that way? This would be the only place where we're supposed to interpret a number and actually meaning a name like that. He says there's no evidence of any other number in the book being used in such way. All the numbers have a figurative significance and symbolize some spiritual reality, and that's true. Mm-hmm.
And so the Roman letter was written in Hebrew, so that the Roman people couldn't understand it.
And that's, you know, that's a good argument. That's a good argument, you know. And it very well, you know, that very well may be the way it was intended to be interpreted. And again, if you take it that way, you have to take the book of Revelation written in Nero's time. He said, well, if that means Nero, then Nero is a significant character, you know, during this time. And it very, you know, again, it's hard to establish these things and nail them down, certainly. But we know Nero was also a what? A persecutor of Christians. You know, so it would make sense, you know, whether Nero, written on the time of Nero in the 60s, or Domitian, and Domitian was a persecutor of Christians too. So Nero and Domitian really had the same, you know, same character, same reputation. So, but it's just to kind of open you and give you the two different interpretations there. Maybe you can come to your own conclusions. Okay, chapter 14, and I really thought we were going to get here sooner, but that's okay. I think you'll find chapter 14 a little bit easier to interpret. Okay, the Lamb and the 144,000. Now, who do you, we know who the Lamb is, right? Who is the Lamb in Revelation? That's exactly right. What about the 144,000? Now, we went back to chapter 7 earlier. Okay? The 144,000 received the seal of God. Who did we say that 144,000 stood for? Remember? Yes, the body of Christ, or the church. So, when you turn to chapter 14, you have this same group mentioned. Look at verse 1. Then I looked, and behold, a lamb, there's the lamb, stands for Jesus, standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000. Some people will take that number and run with it and say there's only going to be 144,000 people in heaven. Is that how the number should be interpreted in a literal way? Why no? 144,000, again, standing for the church, having his Father's name written on their forehead. Now remember, there's that idea of the seal again that stands for what? Ownership or commitment to God. These are the Christians. These are those who serve God. Verse 2, and I heard a voice from heaven like the voice of many waters and like the voice of loud thunder. And I heard the sound of harpists playing their harps, and they sang as it were a new song before the throne, before the four living creatures and the elders, and no one could learn that song except the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. Now, I heard B.J. Clark comment on this passage one time, and he made a good point. If you're going to say that the 144,000, you're going to interpret that literally, that the 144,000 stands for the saved, well, then you have to interpret verse number 4 in a literal way, which says what? These are the ones who are not defiled with women, for they are what? Virgins. But then you have to say that, well, all the ones who will be saved are virgins. You know that's not true.
And males.
Say that again?
And
Males, yeah. So, we understand, yeah, that's right, not defiled with women, so that's a reference to males. Yeah. Okay. And then in verse 4, these are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These are redeemed from among men, being the first fruits to God and to the Lamb. In their mouth was found no deceit, for they are without fault before the throne of God. I'm going to say, man, I'm good at taking up all my space. I'm going to say that who are we talking about? What's being pictured here? The redeemed in heaven. Here's a picture of heaven. I think this goes back to what Jim mentioned earlier. You know, we talk about the beast, we talk about, you know, persecution, the Roman Empire, you know, forcing them to submit, and if they don't, they're murdered, they're martyred. Well, then God reminds them, look, if this happens to you, I want you to be mindful of what's coming for you in the future. So you move from from this idea of persecution and suffering to this picture of what? Heaven. You know, look what you've got coming in the future. You're going to be the ultimate winner in all of this. So I definitely think this is the picture of the redeemed in heaven. Let's try to just get through these 5 verses here. Let's say a couple more things. We've established who the 144,000 are. It's the church. This is a picture of Jesus, the Lamb, the picture of the church with Jesus and their triumph. And then this idea of a new song, verse 3. You know, there's a song in our songbooks that is entitled the New Song. And I think this is the passage from where they get that. They sang, as it were, a new song before the throne. A new song. Perhaps the idea is there that this new song is kind of figurative or symbolic of a new existence, okay? A new situation. Things are different now, being in heaven, different than it was when they were on earth being persecuted. This is their heavenly song. Maybe the song of redemption, I think Wes says on page 100. But it's praise, it's worship, things are well. But let's talk a little bit about let's say something about that word redeemed there. At the end of verse 3, it says the 144,000 who were redeemed from the earth. We've talked about this before, but what does the word redeem mean?
Being saved.
Okay, being saved. That's exactly what it's a reference to. To purchase, that's exactly right.
Price has been paid.
Right. To purchase by means of a ransom. A price was paid, you were purchased. And there's a passage in Revelation that uses that word. Revelation 5 and verse 9, where they were, the heavenly hosts worshiping the Lamb, Jesus, and it says, you have redeemed us to God by your blood. What was that purchase price? Well, it was the blood of Christ. Okay, now go back to verse number 4 here. And let's address this. These are the ones who were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. What are your thoughts there? What do you think is what does that symbolize?
It's not sexual morality, I don't think. It's not sexual morality.
Well, they're definitely, they will definitely not be guilty of that. It's kind of this picture of purity, not defiled in any way. They're undefiled. Maybe the idea here is that these are the ones who do not become unfaithful themselves or defile themselves with the filth of this world. Now, specifically, in context here in the book of Revelation, it may be a reference to idol worship. Do you remember the Old Testament when God talks about Israel and how they often went astray with idols? Do you remember the terminology that he would use when he would say, even through the prophets, he would talk about them going off and worshiping false gods? Do you remember what the Old Testament says there? God says they played the what? Played the harlot. So this idea of idol worship and becoming unfaithful to God being used in the Old Testament, referred to in the Old Testament, as fornication. That sort of thing. So maybe that's the idea here. They did not become spiritually unfaithful in that way. Verse 4, say one more thing, we're running out of time. This harvest imagery at the end of verse 4. These were redeemed from among men. We talked about the word redeemed, being first fruits to God and to the Lamb. What are the first fruits? That's the first of the crop, right? Belonging to God. Now in the Old Testament, their first fruits of their crop belonged to who? To God. They had to give that to Him. So what we're going to see in the rest of chapter 14, and I'm out of time, I'm not going to get there, but what we're going to see is that the end time, the second coming of Christ, is referred to or symbolized by this harvest imagery. Jesus used that type of language to talk about the second coming of Christ. The harvest is coming. The harvest is ripe. And he's going to come and reap the harvest of the earth, and things are going to be done. It's time for harvest. And this idea of first fruits, the Christians being the first fruits to God, they belong to God. We're going to God in the end, aren't we? We're going to be with Him. Jesus said, He's going to put the wheat in the barn, and what's going to do with the chaff? Burn the chaff, right? So this harvest imagery here is being used again to refer to the second coming, us going with God, but there's going to be some more coming that are not Christians, and these are the unfaithful. And guess what's going to happen to the unfaithful? Yeah, something not good. But we'll get into that this next time. I invite you to look at all of chapter 14. I think you'll find it pretty easy to interpret here. It's really a word of warning, referring to the judgment, referring to the second coming of Christ, but a word of hope as well. One of those popular passages that we often quote at funerals, Revelation 14:13. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and the works follow them. There's hope here too, but there's also a word of warning. Get ready for the judgment. Be ready. Don't become unfaithful to God. Appreciate your attention this morning. I hope that these things have been profitable to you. I hope Revelation is making more sense. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah.
probably did, wasn't